I do miss the beginning years of entrepreneurship. So if you're someone that's brand new to this or looking at getting into it and you're scared, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, I do look back on those years of like the baptism by fire of trying to figure it out very fondly. Of course, at the time I was stressed. I just want to make it. I just need to make money. I just want to serve and impact the world. But I think the important thing is to realize, like I talked about earlier, like marrying your interests with your personal stuff. I mean, your interests with your business stuff, and know that you can't do it all at one time. So the way that I kind of built it to quote unquote do it all was, one piece at a time. And I would see a formula work, whether it was in marketing or how I approached like consumers with consumer psychology, whatever piece it is that you're struggling with. And I would fine tune and work on that in one brand or one, I had multiple businesses of one brand. And then I would take and almost copy paste that with the adjustments for, if you're attracting a new avatar, the consumers, what the marketing plan is going to be, and just continually adjust and build that as you go. Really, everything that I have done, yeah, I've learned a lot. So there's been changes, but the fundamental basics of entrepreneurship is all relatively the same.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, okay, we know where Canada is, in British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right. And then there is a big city there, Vancouver, right? And where are you, John, in relation to Vancouver? Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or 800 kilometers, and that puts us in the center of British Columbia, north-south, east to west. A big, big province. Lots of forest, lots of trees, and then a very interesting community, about 82,000 people, and we have lots of friends here. Black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, wolves, foxes, you name them all, we call it paradise. So today we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Rachel Brenke. Did I say that correct?
You did.
And Rachel is a business lawyer, entrepreneur, a mom of 5. Rachel is what happens when a big law brain meets the real world business grit. She's not just another talking lead, but also very, very involved as an entrepreneur. Parenting chaos is part of her. She's also a podcaster. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So if you can give us a bit of background about you, individual, you have a busy life, and obviously a family and 5 children is a handful, but you are a podcaster, you're a speaker, you're an author, you're doing lots and lots and lots of stuff. And then obviously you have a law firm and a very interesting practice in litigation issues and civil law, we believe, but you will talk about that. So maybe start with telling us where you're originally from and your education, your background, and we'll take it from there.
So I always kind of cringe when people lead in the intro with lawyer, because I'm afraid that everyone's going to shut the podcast off, because who wants to hear from a lawyer? But I didn't start there. I actually started an online design and apparel company way back in 2005, 2006. I just had my first son, was going to school, and needed to make some extra money. And I kind of always knew that I didn't want to work for myself. So this was before I was ever a lawyer by, oh my goodness, probably 13 years at that point. So I just kind of went through, built that business, started learning, built some other online businesses. And then I went to law school. I had graduated university, worked on masters, went for business since I was doing business coaching at that point. And I decided to go to law school thinking I was going to make a complete change away from the business world. Not really sure why, except that I was really drawn to the idea of seeking justice for individuals, specifically child victims in the criminal system. And so I went into law school with the intention of that. And at the same time, I had been building this online business, teaching specifically creatives and photographers how to legally protect their business, started learning about intellectual property, answering the questions. By the time I graduated, I had built such a brand. It was, profitable for my family to help support them. And of course, when I graduated, I went to go look into public service prosecutor jobs. I had 3 kids at the time. I was going to spend more in daycare than I was actually going to be able to bring home. So I struggled with that for a long time, though, switching gears for, thinking going into law school, I was going to go into criminal work and then set up my private practice almost immediately. I struggled for a long time thinking that I wasn't doing any good in the world. And then I realized I was attracting other individuals like myself, moms that wanted to be able to have a flexible lifestyle. They wanted to build like an online primary virtual business that was flexible. That took me many years to get there, that understanding and realizing that I was making an impact, just not in the way that I had originally set out.
Yeah, so in which area are you in the United States, I presume?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I completely bypassed all of that. I'm
yeah,
right outside of Washington, D.C., about 45 miles. I say miles because that could be 2 hours when it's traffic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, so that's interesting. And then the other part, coming to your question, your observation that soon, with all the people watching us from around the world, as soon as you say lawyer, they turn off the TV. But we don't want them to do that because we are not only talking about law, which is interesting, but we're also talking about building a career and then trying to find direction as to where do I want to grow. And obviously you had a strong feeling about young people in particular that had challenges and for a number of reasons likely. Then you looked at, and that brings us to law. Law, there is a variety, and I'm just talking from a client perspective in Canada, which is fairly similar to the United States and other places in the world. Law is a broad topic that has different directions. You touched on criminal law. You talked about prosecution, that is representing the crown or whatever it is, and mainly in criminal law, and then intellectual property, which means how do I protect intellectual items that are part of, in a lot of cases, not necessarily exclusive. It's my books, maybe, it's quoting my books, my brand, and all of those kind of issues, other specialties. But law can also be very entrepreneurial, and like for people in business like myself that have a number of businesses, we rely on legal advice in a lot of cases, not only in corporate issues, but intellectual issues and all kinds of other things. So it is something that is critical in business in particular, but also in areas where we are either authors or speakers or other issues. We will encounter law at some point in fashion.
Yeah, and so that's how I really got into prior to going to law school was I had no background in that, and I was setting up my own businesses, and then I had friends that were also, how did you do it? So I started blogging through my research to share for others, and then moved into podcasting, YouTube, and so forth. And so it kind of just grew over the years. I know you mentioned like I have done a lot, and I just want the viewers to understand like this wasn't a 3-year journey. I am over 20 years into this journey at this point. It has evolved and grown. And most of the businesses that I've gotten into, while with the intention of being able to be flexible, present for my kids, financially provide for them, a lot of the businesses reflect that when I built them, reflected a personal interest of mine. Like, for example, during law school, I was getting into photography because I felt my head kind of felt heavy. It was so heavy with law on one side. I wanted to kind of be balanced out with creativity on the other. And so that snowballed into a brand that I still have of helping photographers specifically with legal stuff. Later on down the road, when I got into triathlons, went on to compete with Team USA in triathlons, winter and summer, I then developed a fitness brand that also does the same thing with that legal support for fitness entrepreneurs. So I think the lesson here, the big takeaway is, well, a couple of them. One, this was 2 decades worth of work, right? And I've got other things that I haven't even mentioned. And two, I think why it's so important to look around and you can marry your personal and business life. They don't have to be excluded. We talk about work-life balance, but I'm looking at it from an interest perspective. I felt more passionate and excited when I was marrying my personal interests with also the business knowledge and legal experience I could provide.
So, what is interesting about it, Rachel, is that even when you had the initial foundation, is finding direction took you into entrepreneurship. The other part that I did not mention at the introduction, but I marked it out specially, is that you're an athlete, and in fact, you were part of Team USA in triathlon, I believe. So,
Yes.
which is amazing as well. So there you are entrepreneurial, and entrepreneurship in particular, what I believe is you, and I refer to myself that way. I was born to be an entrepreneur. I already did it from my early age. I was interested in entrepreneurship. At some point, it would become part of my life. And that's kind of what I think happened to you as well. The only thing is that with law, unless you are entrepreneurial, you can get stuck in a particular direction. May that be commercial law or criminal law or anything like that, or another specialty, then you can get stuck in that area. But you didn't do that. You became entrepreneurial in addition to that, and then at the same time have 5 children
I
to
do.
and that alone is a full-time job in
It's a
nearly.
lot.
Yeah. So how did you do it all? How did you make it all work?
Well, I mean, again, all of this is sequential in time, right? I wasn't building all these things at once. They were
No.
building on top of each other.
Yeah.
So, at the first, I do miss the beginning years of entrepreneurship. So, if you're someone that's brand new to this or looking at getting into it and you're scared, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, I do look back on those years of like the baptism by fire of trying to figure it out very fondly. Of course, at the time, I was stressed. I just want to make it. I just need to make money. I just want to serve and impact the world. But I think the important thing is to realize, like I talked about earlier, like marrying your interests with your personal stuff. I mean, your interests with your business stuff, and know that you can't do it all at one time. So the way that I kind of built it to quote unquote do it all was, one piece at a time, and I would see a formula work, whether it was in marketing or how I approached like consumers with consumer psychology, whatever piece it is that you're struggling with. And I would fine tune and work on that in one brand or one, I had multiple businesses of one brand. And then I would take and almost copy paste that with the adjustments for, if you're attracting a new avatar, the consumers, what the marketing plan is going to be, and just continually adjust and build that as you go. Really, everything that I have done, yeah, I've learned a lot. So there's been changes, but the fundamental basics of entrepreneurship is all relatively the same, whether you are in fitness industry, in the fashion industry, and that even, of course, crosses over to law as well. But to answer your question, I tried to keep it as simple as possible on the business side and not changing too many variables at one time. One, I didn't have the time to do that. But two, I wanted to be able to track what variables were giving me a positive or negative ROI. On the personal side, and I also for business, I'm very big proponent of block scheduling. So scheduling, like doing podcast interviews only on certain days. My mind just works really well. If I have a chunk of time just to do podcasting for 5 or 6 hours, I can be in that mode. Switching back and forth kind of frazzles me if my calendar changes. So between that and then not being afraid to have support, whether it's in the business or in your home. One of the very first hires that I did once I was profitable was got a home cleaner to help me maintain the house, because in the time that she was cleaning, I could be making more money, and I was also employing a single mom. And then for the business side, when I first started, I was wearing all the hats because I didn't have the money to even pay anyone else. The very first thing I hired in my business was customer service emails, so that I wasn't having to be tied to that all the time. And relinquishing control of that was kind of hard.
Interesting, So, and then the other part, if you don't mind if I say that, I have a picture of you, and that doesn't look to me like what I view as the stiff three-piece suit or dress lawyer sitting there and saying, but you look like, if I may say that, I'm 85, nearly 85 years old, so I can say that. You're very attractive.
Thank you.
You look in very, very good shape. And obviously, I like what you're wearing because you're entrepreneur, hustler, it says on your shirt. And so very, very interesting. And then to have all these things on your mind and have your whole plate full. Now, in my case, I don't know how much you know about me, but I do a lot of stuff. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a podcaster. I'm not trying to brag here, but just to put it into perspective, 10 different companies and all this. And a lot of people say to me, how do you do all this stuff? And I wrote a book about that. It took me a long time to figure out I was ADHD. And I wrote a book about that, ADHD Unlocked. I call it a superpower. And so, so my life has always been in business, always building, expanding, and you have to be able to wear many, many hats, and you have to be able to fill out the gaps behind you, build a team around you, because you can't do it all, and to put something together to make it all work and run well, and at the same time, the other part, and I'm just kind of mixing that part in as well, is, and as my comment, looking at your picture, you're proactive in diet, obviously, and you're proactive in health and fitness, and so am I. And then, although I'm close to my mid-80s, I'm going to turn 85 November the 1st, and so I wrote a book about that. It's not about age, the number, but about quality of life. And the book that I wrote is Living Young, Dying Old. Picture of me, actually. I'm a bodybuilder, and by coincidence, just going to the gym, and somebody said, hey, have you ever thought about bodybuilding? I said, me, really? That was in my mid-70s. And I said, well, why not? And I did that. So I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America, and qualified for the Arnolds and the Nationals here in Canada. And now again, then obviously COVID happened, and now I'm training again. So when I'm 86, go back to the Arnolds.
That's so awesome.
But the most important part about it is, Rachel, that health and fitness and diet and quality of life issues to me are very, very important. I
Agreed.
love going to the gym, and I believe it is critically important for me for quality of life. So that what I always do, I try to get lots of vitamin D in some form or fashion. I sleep 7 to 9 hours a night. I'm very conscientious about diet. My wife is a vegetarian, and so I wasn't always fully in touch, didn't always do exactly what I should have been doing until when I was in my late 60s. I got a scare that kind of changed myself in terms of having to be more conscientious of diet, and then at the same time want more consistent to the gym, got a trainer, and hence that is now 16 years ago. And so I've been going to the gym, and I enjoy it. and I'm
Hmm.
working hard, physically hard, but also, is walking and staying active, and combining it with strength training is very important. And then I do all the shopping for my wife and myself, can you imagine? And I'm now
That's
probably
awesome.
80/20. So when I go to a store, I go to the store and I shop on the outside of the store because I don't like processed food or super processed. If I can't read what is in it, then we don't want it. And
Mhm.
so being very, very conscientious, I believe, is very important.
I agree with you. And it's interesting. So I swam in college and then I kind of fell off, doing a lot of physical exercise. Even after I had my cancer back in 2007, I was still in that building a business phase and got so sucked into it. I just remember at one point I felt so burnt out and I had to take a step back and remind myself that building a business is a slow burn. It's not a fast pop, and so that's when I started integrating the block scheduling. Like the very first thing that goes on my calendar is actually my personal stuff. So my workouts, my kids' stuff, and everything else fills in around that. Sometimes I have to be flexible just if an opportunity arises. But for the most part, myself setting out, and then now that I have a team that manages it for me, they know how incredibly important it is. And they have even, they'll joke if I'm just off one day, they'll go, "Did you not get your workout in?" Or if I'm a little testy, they're like, "You didn't work out this morning, did you?" But it's really good because then you also have a piece of accountability within your teams as well. But they also recognize the importance. And in fact, during COVID, we were so incredibly busy since most of my businesses are law connected in some form or fashion. We were also incredibly busy, and of course, all the gyms were shut down. I bought my team Pelotons so that they could do the bike from home because health and wellness is such an integral part of our culture in our companies, I guess.
Yeah, and so I feel the same in my world. It's very, very busy, but again, we have a very good team around us, and so and they know in terms of diet, very, very important to me, and then going to the gym is always a priority. I
Mm-hmm.
go out of my way making sure I go to the gym, do a lot of strength training there as well, and it's part of my life. And the amazing part about it is, in a lot of I always that's why I wrote the book, is to be an inspiration to other people, male, female, that are older, is saying you're never too old to start and to go to the gym, and and then it becomes a chore. But then if you stay the course, and then what will happen is that at some point somebody will say, "Hey, Rachel or John, you look good. What are you doing?" And then as others notice, you start to feel it. And then if you stay the course and you make it part of your life, you will enjoy it. Absolutely guaranteed. And then
Mm-hmm.
obviously there is the quality of life, combining it with all the other things, for especially for people that get older, the last decade of their lives, in a lot of cases, they are on all kinds of medicine of some sort or another, take a handful of those, and a lot of it is, respectfully, toxic, not good for you likely, other than for one particular purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And the less of that you do, and the more you stay with healthy food and be aware of what you put into your body wants to be healthy and fit. and
Mm-hmm.
and and there is no limit, as I do in my book. The even at the mid 80s, everything is possible, and to have that feeling of fitness. What I do is I get up 5:30 in the morning, and then I always make my bed, and I'm always think I'm late, and so that's and every day to me is precious.
Mm-hmm.
And I look around and realize that we are so fortunate living
Mm-hmm.
in North America in particular. I do a lot of business in the United States as well. I do a lot of commercial flying. I'm also a private pilot, but I do a lot of commercial flying. And when I fly, and especially on the west coast of the United States and other places in Canada, I sit by the window and look outside and say, it's paradise. It is paradise. We are so lucky. And then in my case, I was born in 1940, and northeastern Holland saw far too much of things that we should not have seen in the war years, and things were tough for us as a family. And it's still part of me in terms of PTSD, the inner child, and a number of other things. So I appreciate democratic rule and governments that are stable, not dictatorships. And as we saw during my life in the war years in Holland, and so that's what I like about North America. And I hope sometimes it is being challenged a bit that we preserve democratic rule. And the foundation was for us after the war years, where the Americans, the Canadians, and the UK in particular liberated most of Western Europe from the Russians. And then afterwards we had the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe. And so I still appreciate the land of my heroes, Canada. We were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. It made such an impression on me as a 5-year-old that I always knew I would go, as I grew up, to the lands of my heroes, Canada. And and I did when I was 24, and I appreciated starting with nothing, good speak language, didn't know a soul, and then building companies and doing all of those things. But first and foremost, every day to me is a special day.
I agree. And I love, so by the way, you mentioned private pilot's license. I've been working on mine. I haven't completed it yet, which brings me to my point. We're talking about, or I said, schedule on your calendar, have your workout every morning. One of the lessons that I've learned with my hobbies, whether it was triathlon or whatever, but also, and with business, is to also check in with yourself and not get this rigid structure and feel like, especially as entrepreneurs, I feel like if we adjust from that, we feel like we failed in some way. So for example, pre-COVID, I was doing Team USA, I was doing Ironman triathlons, went to World Championship. That is a lot of time commitment and physical commitment. And my kids were getting older. And so pandemic hit, obviously everything shut down. And I've done a few Ironmans since then, marathons, completed the 5-star challenge with the majors. But I kind of got to a point where I realized I was in a new season of life. My kids were older. I had to put more time into that. And of course, I was staring down turning 40. And so I actually adjusted away from doing triathlon I got into powerlifting. And you mentioned earlier that someone in the gym said that to you. I had gone into the gym to get a trainer to help do strength training so I could get back into Ironmans. And they were like, just try powerlifting for a little bit for me. And I realized through that process, I still ran marathons and I was very strong from the strength training, but I was able to scale back the amount of time that I was putting into physical, because doing Ironman training, I would be gone 6-7 hours for a bike ride and run like on Thursdays, because I didn't want to take one from my family on weekend. So where was it taken away from? Business.
Yeah.
So being aware to that shift and the change of season of life, whether it's your personal hobbies or your business schedule, what that looks like, I think we're talking about physical health, but also for mental health, you'll help avoid yourself from getting into burnout. Because I think as entrepreneurs, we make a plan, we put the blinders on, we start digging, and we don't pick our head up and go, whoa, I actually am seeing signs of burnout. This is negatively impacting family or self or even your businesses. So for me, and I still struggle with that because I've got that inherent sense of, I don't want to, if I give up on this, I must be failing in some way.
Right. So, but to find that balance is very, very critical, very important. So how old are the children that you have? And maybe mention, if you mind, their first name, so because they probably will be watching us and at some point. And I believe it's such a beautiful, to have the 5 children. And as they get older, maybe tell us what they are doing and how old are they?
I will. It's funny because they'll come home from school and say, one of my friends saw you on YouTube, or they tried to Google me, but they could only find you and one picture of me. Yeah, so my oldest is 20. He's out in the world on his own now. And then I've got my daughter, Olivia, who's 15. She is me, but a way better version. I'm so excited for her future, what that looks like. Caleb, the middle child, is 13. He's in middle school, plays soccer. Micah is 11, plays baseball. And then Evelyn, my baby, not so baby, she's 10. And she
She's
loves
10.
YouTube, TikTok, and all those things. So I could
Three
see her
girls,
becoming
two
a great,
guys, two boys.
yeah, 3 boys, 2 girls.
3 boys, 2 girls. Yeah. So and they are getting older now. So the youngest one is 13. You said
And the youngest is 10.
10. So but still already at 10 is
Mhm.
getting. So so the critical part for me was always to. It took me a long time to figure out. I was not a success story academically in Holland. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. So they said to my parents, what are you going to do with this guy? And some people said, send him to the mentally challenged school. He said, no, no, we're not going to do that. So my grandfather was a master carpenter and my dad, worked in lumber. And so they said, well, let's, at 12 and a half years old, failing the 3rd time in grade 7, let's send him to the furniture factory, make him a furniture maker. So at 12 and a half years old, I want to become a laborer. I'm proud of that today. But then my friends that went on to college and university kind of looked down on that. And, but in my own little world, I always knew I was just as smart as the others, but I couldn't figure out why I was different. And it took me a long time. And then the dream was to go to Canada when I was 5 and we were liberated by the Canadian Army. And I wanted to go when I was 17. And then in Holland at the time, I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force. And when I was 18 for a little over 2 years. And so, then after that again worked in lumber and then decided to go when I was 24 years old. And, and I felt I had to start from the ground up with nothing. And so I left for Canada. I knew I wanted to, the other dream I had to build my own lumber mill. And so I wanted to start with nothing. So I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, very little money. And I flew into Montreal and then took the train from Montreal to Vancouver. 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that is a long way. And so when I came to Vancouver, I went to the immigration department, couldn't speak English, and fortunately there was a German fella, so I told him, I want to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George, 500 miles north, 800 kilometers. And so that's what I did. And I came off the bus here 60 years later in Prince George. I can still see where the Greyhound station used to be. And I had my suitcase, I had 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. But attitude, I always had a positive attitude, even still today, even then. If you're negative, I don't even want to have you near me. The other one is passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And the other one is work ethic. And as I said earlier, I work harder than anybody even now. Get up at 5:30, always make my bed, and always think I'm late. And I still, fortunately, still do that even today at nearly 85. And then obviously, I then became an author and then became active in podcasting, which I believe is the new media. And I know you're a podcaster as well. I find it an amazing ability to share with the world through podcasting. It is still on its infancy and an opportunity to share ideas and from different parts of the world. One day we have somebody from Australia, maybe next one somebody from Athens, Greece. Amazing.
It is cool. The thing is, I was mentioning earlier, kind of like my timeline. It was about 2005 when I started getting into business. And at that time, there wasn't the amount of information we have now. I'm not sure YouTube, if it existed at the time, it definitely wasn't mainstream the way it is now. We
No,
didn't have Facebook. So all this freemium, all this free information, it's almost overwhelming right now out
it
there, but
is.
wasn't available. And
No.
so I think, if you're just starting out and you're watching this, understand, I love that you're in an era where there's all this information, but you need to be really mindful and be really intentional when you are seeking out podcasts, the background history of the person, their actual like receipts, if you will, of their success, and not allowing yourselves to get overwhelmed with the amount of information out there. I mentioned earlier, keeping it simple as possible is going to be best. And like I said, some of the formulas, my internal formulas that I created in the very beginning, that was over 20 years ago, almost, yes, almost 21 years. It's still the same. Even though technology has changed and the economy, political climate, everything has changed, all of those foundations still exist there. So don't get overwhelmed. Stick to the simple. And I love the three that you have on the wood block. If you can develop your own values, that also help to be a beacon for when you're making decisions on opportunities like coming on a podcast as an example.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%, and that's kind of what I try to do and still stick to that. And obviously, a lot of things have changed, but same even if you're older. Amazingly, I have friends now still that don't do email, and to stay with the future is important. And the next one obviously is AI, and that we a whole program on its own. The other thing that I just want to talk to you about is that one of the questions is that what is one's legal mistake you see entrepreneurs make over and over again, and how can they fix it before it costs them?
Can I cheat and say a few multiple things? Can I say more
Yeah,
than
yeah,
one?
yeah.
Okay, so I've kind of boiled down the legal things that almost every business needs into a 3-2-1 structure. And these are kind of like the top level 10,000-foot view. The three is going to be your business setup. So this is looking at, or liability protection. So it's going to be business setup, contracts, and insurance together. This is the proactive piece of making sure not only are you complying with your laws in your country, state, whatever the jurisdiction, but so that you're protecting yourself. Contracts, setting expectations with your clients, your customers, whatever that looks like, and then insurance as a backup if there's a problem. The two in the formula is intellectual property, like we talked about before. Like here, specifically in the United States and in most countries, we have trademark and copyright protections. And you mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast. This is where brand protection is so incredibly important. And show me one business that doesn't have a brand. Even if you don't have a website, you have reputation because you're getting customers from somewhere. That's a brand. And then the one is marketing legalities. This is when you're putting yourself out there. It's government regulated. So use how you're putting yourself out there, data protection, things like that. So sticking kind of the three to all of those can be proactive, but they'll also help fulfill legal requirements, which is going to set you up for saving money if you have an issue. It's going to help prevent issues. And then also, so you're not having to pay fees and fines to the government unnecessarily because you didn't comply with the laws.
So you already partially answered this. What are the biggest myths around trademarks and copyrights that business owners need to stop believing?
Oh, so on the copyright side, especially here in the US, we have common law copyright protections. So there's no requirement to go register it with the Copyright Office. And this is a huge thing in the creative field. You're going to have more protections if you go and take that step and pay for registration at the Copyright Office. That's a huge myth. It doesn't mean you don't have protections in your assets, photos, videos, logo, etc., but that's definitely one. The second one, and probably most importantly, well, they're all important. I can't just pick one, is trademark. And I'm very specifically speaking to your brand, your business name. And I understand this because I was this in the beginning too. One, I didn't know what trademark was because I wasn't a lawyer yet, but I didn't even know if I was going to make it. So not only did I not have the funds to put into doing these steps or even talking to a lawyer, I didn't want to invest money in trademarking once I knew what it was if I wasn't even sure that I was going to grow this into a profitable brand. The problem with that is if you don't do your trademark checks before you put yourself out into business, you could be on the end of a lawsuit by infringing upon someone else. Someone else may come in and get the name before you. And in the end, you're looking at having to rebrand. It's funny. I was actually on a podcast. There was an individual that was launching a new product in their business. And I had known this person for years. They knew what I did. And it just was not really on their radar thinking about trademarks. I'm not sure why. But we're on this podcast, and this person had done like a blitz recording a podcast and guesting over like a 2-week period leading up to the launch of this business. And we're talking, and they say the name of what the product's going to be. And I was like, that sounds really familiar to me. Continue the podcast. After we got off of there, I went and checked it, and somebody else already had that name for that product or service. So I texted them and said, here, call me. And we talked about it. And I was like, you cannot launch this. And I said, in all the podcasts that you just sat and promoted and spent 2 weeks, hours worth of time doing, you can't launch them, or else this company is going to sue you. So it'd been simple as if he had just come to me or whoever else and done that check before investing all that time into building. We had the marketing agencies already spinning stuff up, did all these podcasts. It was a lot of wasted time, money, and energy that could have been avoided.
And yeah, and that means in a lot of cases, correct me if I am wrong, intellectual property, it is not only in the US market, but it could be Canada, it could be the rest of the world. So it then becomes a question, how do you protect the trademarking or other elements that are critical to that particular venture? How do I protect that? And then the danger is there that from a legal perspective, at the time that you start this idea, then saying, and I'm just hypothetically suggesting that now I have to protect that name or that trademark, that could be very, very expensive.
I mean, the actual, it's more costly, like the story I just told you, and having a rebrand than it is to actually set up a trademark. And so for US based, you can go online and do it yourself. I don't suggest that. Copyright's a lot easier. It's fill in the blank form. But for trademarks, I don't suggest it because there are nuances in trademark law. But to your question about in other countries, I actually even represent some Canadian companies because they are directly selling into the US. And so we did US protections to make sure that the intellectual property, copyright or trademark, was protected. The good thing with like being in the US and doing business here and then, you know, going into Canada, UK, Australia, things like that, we also have conventions that allow for me to reach into another country, whether it's my intellectual property or on behalf of a client. There are legal conventions available that basically connect the dots between the two countries that allow for us to have legal protections there. So this is why it's so incredibly important, you know, to talk to an attorney or figure out your business plan. That's one of the first questions I always have with my legal clients. Where do you intend on going with this? What is your marketing plan? Because if I say business plan, sometimes when they're new, their brains explode. So I say, what is your marketing plan? Because I'll be able to pick out these pieces and fill in the legal gaps for them.
So if somebody said to you, hypothetically speaking, so I have this idea that I want to do and it may well become global.
Mm-hmm. I asked them, what's the marketing plan? Where do you plan to penetrate first? Like, where are you going to launch first? Where do you go after that? What is the timeline of that? And I kind of reverse engineer that plan and give them the steps in order that we need to do. I'm not, and I get it. I know a lot of you listening are like, well, it's easy for a lawyer to sit here and say you need all these things. If I had just $1 US dollar for every single time a client said, well, I didn't know this would be a problem, I wouldn't even have to charge for the services, because there's this gap in knowledge, which is why I do what I do. I already shared with you all, I didn't know when I first started out for a good 13 years. I didn't really truly understand the legal field. So I'm not knocking, shaming or anything. I'm encouraging to, you know, you're getting your business underway, you're getting your business plan down, marketing plan, just consider sooner than later at least getting a checklist of what you need to do, even if you don't tackle it all at once.
So that then being said, and looking at our global audience potentially, but talking in particular about North America, and likely that is the case in Western Europe as well, to the best of my knowledge, is saying that if I just want to start a business,
Mm-hmm.
I call a law firm and I then rely on them to direct me, or would I go a different way and saying, okay, what I have to think about is a number of, because I have to get a lawyer that can help me, direct me in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And this maybe is part of a question that I should ask that may well be attached to this. What lessons have you learned from litigation that most entrepreneurs miss until it's too late? And this relates to that, is saying that how do beginning entrepreneur think about building this business
Mm-hmm.
if you, from my experience, talk to a law firm in general, really don't understand what, respectfully, intellectual property is. How do I, potential entrepreneur wanting to invest, have all the ideas that we have there ready? What do
Mm-hmm.
we do? And when, in some cases, it's too late, and then becomes litigation for, on the basis of use of intellectual property that was already secure.
I love that you asked this because I was going to mention this anyways before you got to the next question. Finding a lawyer is easy. Finding a lawyer that takes real world application and the law and marries it together is incredibly important. And I think, for tooting my own horn, since I come from an entrepreneurial background, I look at it not just what the law is, but also how is this going to impact. For example, if I'm representing you, maybe one of your customers breached contract, I'm going to talk to you about the numbers as a business person. Well, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars to pay me, the attorney. Do you really want to pursue this person? Because you're going to be upside down. Like at the end of the day, do you really want to do this? A lot of lawyers won't do that. Typically, when you call a law firm, globally in the US, they're going to know the law and they'll say, yes, you have a case. But that piece is so missing in the legal field of how does this actually play out in real life? And so when you are looking at going to talk to a law firm, two things. One, I suggest that you do, well, three things. You do the research on them, figure out their background. Two, you do an introductory call and see if they can do kind of a whole audit, kind of like I was mentioning. I'll talk you through like what your marketing business plan is. And then I developed a mirrored legal plan. And then three, they need to have the mindset, like I just mentioned here. And I say need, I think there's a great disservice, not just in the legal field. We see this with doctors, we see this with all professionals. There's a gap in knowledge with some people, and professional licensors don't feel that. That's where the real world experience of the individual that you're hiring is coming in. So making sure that you go to someone that truly understands what is podcasting like. This is what do you understand the complications that I'm going to run into? Not just from a legal standpoint, but from real world application. Because for me, the goal is to be as proactive as possible to avoid litigation, like you mentioned. I've done litigation from state court all the way through federal court. And I tell you, it kills businesses. It is financially destructive to businesses. So if we can prevent or at least try to dismantle the issue before it gets escalated, so that's my approach. And other lawyers may disagree with me on this. I have just found with working with entrepreneurs like I have for how long now, they do appreciate this as opposed to me just being a lawyer going, yep, you have a case, pay me $500 an hour. I'm saying, okay, pump the brakes. And of course, I would like that money. I would like to take my kids to Disney World for Christmas. But I didn't just get into doing this for the legal piece. I got into this to help serve other entrepreneurs. And I hope that I'm acting like the person that I needed 20 years ago. Because I had hired a lawyer at one point. I didn't know how it worked. I never worked with a lawyer before. This is before I was a lawyer. And they weren't transparent in their pricing. I never was educated. They never sat and talked through what different things were for me. And all of a sudden, I get hit with an $18,000 bill. And in that moment, I told myself, I never, ever want that to be my client to ever feel that way. And so I kind of use that to guide in my legal work, as well as what I've learned as an entrepreneur. Things that I didn't like that happened to me, and I take responsibility a part of that too. But that's kind of what guides me there. Sorry, I went off on a little
Yeah,
tangent
no,
about that,
no.
but
What I like about it, Rachel, is that what I would say from my experience, but just putting myself at the beginning, is saying that I have a fairly good idea about law in the United States as well as in particular Canada, obviously. But is that what I like is in especially as it relates to intellectual law, protecting trademarking and those kind of things. I like to have a lawyer's mind that is entrepreneurial, because in order for him or her to do a good job for me, she has to think like I think, and being able at least to get a good understanding of what I'm trying to do as an entrepreneur, to present precisely what you were referring to, that you don't get to a situation and all of a sudden you get sued for 18, 20,000 or dollars more. That may be the amount, but it does not even touch on legal fees
mhm,
that you would want to require, and it becomes very, very messy very, very quickly. And so that would be my advice, and the same would apply, at least in my opinion, from my experience in the United States and in Canada, as well as in Europe, is that the legal systems are not all that much different in regards to
mm-mm,
some specialties. But law is just not law. There is a variety of legal directions that are critical and must be, at least in principle, being understood. And
mhm.
it's now easy enough to contact people, and like in your case, and you will give us that before we leave, is give us a website that we can check on
Mhm.
and your particular company. And I think your firm's name was, I had it,
Eden Law.
yes. And
Eden Law.
and
Well,
is that a website as well?
yeah, eden-law.com, or you can just Google me. I'm the only Rachel Brinke. One thing I wanted to say with this, again, I can kind of get into lawyer mode and I sound
Yeah, yeah.
almost robotic. I want you all listening to picture this. You're probably feeling maybe a little overwhelmed, trying to balance, do it all, do all the things. You're going to try to integrate what you've learned in this podcast. And you may think you have a good balance, but you're maxed of time. We all have X amount of time and energy and money, right? So I want you to imagine you're trucking along trying to build this business, and then all of a sudden you're blindsided with a cease and desist or a lawsuit, or something's happening online and you're scrambling to find a lawyer. You're going to have so much mental anxiety and stress, which is going to impact you physically, which is also going to impact your output in your business and family. So law is not just law. Like, there's real world actions that can gravely impact and shake the stability of your business and yourself. And it's so hard for me to like really impress upon this, because I get it. Like I said at the beginning, no one wants to hear from a lawyer. That's why I dress the way I do. I don't even notice I have my nose ring in. Like I always wanted to be laid back because I never wanted to be a stuffy lawyer. First of all, um, actually, funny story. I did have to go to court yesterday. I did put on a suit. I forgot to take my nose ring out, and I didn't realize it till afterwards. And I was like, oh, and my client didn't say anything. The bailiff didn't say anything. The judge, and so I don't know if they could even see it. But I wiped my nose afterwards, and I went, oh my gosh, because in some settings I do want to conform with the rules and all things like that. But nobody said anything to me. That's just a tangent here. But my point is, law doesn't have to be overwhelming and scary. So we've given you the structure of understanding, do it sooner and rather than later, before you have an issue, and really just try to find someone with an entrepreneurial mindset. And when
I
I was
like
starting
this
out,
lawyer.
yes, yeah, I was not thrilled to put on a suit. I was very uncomfortable. The majority of the time, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But I think when I started out, I was waiting tables. I was selling stuff in garage sales because I was trying to reinvest in my business. So maybe that's just a good, simple way here, if you can financially make it work, to talk to a lawyer sooner than later.
And then I'm supposedly a successful businessman, and there is certain expectations of what I should be looking like and what I should dress, and I don't. I'm just me, So I
Mm-hmm.
started out as a cleanup man, lumber pilot, and then I'm kind of proud of I failed grade
Mm-hmm.
3 and I failed grade 7 3 times, and so but I did not realize about ADHD, and I call it a
Mm-hmm.
superpower, and I speak about that from time to time, but I don't make it a big issue. But I say everything is possible,
Mm-hmm.
and my next book that I'm writing is about you can, and that kind of is been my life and my history, and I believe that is very important. Now, the other one that I was going to just talk about is, let's talk about burnout. How do you reset when everything feels like too much? And you've been through
I
periods of that, so have I.
Yeah, just, I mean, one, recognizing that it's happening. And then honestly, I sit down and I think about what are the actual emotions, because burnout's such a broad spectrum, right? Is it anxiousness? Is it fear? Is it overwhelm? And that kind of is a good guiding light for me to then look at a list of the activities or the time investment that I'm either spending or wasting on something. It I think a lot of it is also a heartfelt sense. Like if I know I just feel overwhelmed with a certain action in the business, I assess it. Can I step back from this a bit? Can I delegate it? Same thing on the personal side. Um, Burnout's going to happen. There's so many entrepreneurial podcasts out there, and you see so many successful people, and you look at them cool, calm, collected, they get burnout. What matters is what they do with that, because being stuck in burnout, and I definitely felt this during pandemic, right? The world shut down, and I had 5 kids at home at the time. They were doing virtual learning. My businesses were the busiest they had ever been because people needed legal help. And so I was doing virtual learning in the day with the kids. I was working in the evening, still trying to work out. And at one point, I was like, I can't keep going like this, because we didn't know when it was going to end. So I was like forced in that situation. I just kind of carry over, making sure that I'm checking in with myself, and then kind of identifying the areas that are adding to that or exacerbating that feeling.
So the other part that I find from my experience, and I've been through a lot of it, obviously seeing far too much during the war years, and 1944 in particular, I was only 4.5 years old. There was no food. My dad had been drafted into the Dutch army, and the last time they saw him was just before the bombing of Rotterdam. And for 5 years, my mom already had 2 kids. They were 2 years older than me, 1 year older than me, and then I was born November the 1st, 1940. That there was no food, and and we as kids would go every morning with gunny sacks into the railroad yard, pick up anything burnable and edible. And the reason we did as kids, because they wouldn't shoot us, they put us one, but we'd be back the following morning. And then seeing far too much that, in terms of, things got very, very challenging, because we were in the northeastern part of Holland, where the Allied forces are pushed the Germans out through the western part of Holland and through the north. That's where we were, and the Germans were, and we were all victims on both sides of the border. But, they became very, very anxious. They had nothing left, and they blew up all the bridges behind them. And where we were, things got pretty, pretty rough, and we saw far too much. But at the same time, the experience laid a foundation that
Mm-hmm.
likely added to that my, I would nearly say failure of academic failure, is that I say tongue in cheek, somebody said to me, I did presentations, and somebody said to me, do you still feel bad about that you failed grade 7 3 times? Because I talk about it frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I do, I really do. I should have left earlier. And, kind of tongue in cheek, more or less.
Yeah.
So my learning was not the formal educational system, but life. And I learned well because I focused on things that interested me more so than anything else. And it served me obviously well. And then, but the other part that it did, and that's the point that I was trying to make, Rachel, is that I've seen so much in terms of anxiety, either or the fear of losing my mom, hence getting counseling for the inner child in my 50s, very emotional actually, but very important. And so that always has been part of me. How do I deal with crises? And is that I have that now. From time to time we go through that, and I believe that my foundation has served me well to do that in terms of dealing with myself and managing some things that are difficult, and how can I work my way through it. Is that foundation, although a real challenge, I look at it as that it served me well.
I'm glad you mentioned therapy, and that's something I should have mentioned as well. I think that's an integral part, whether you've gone through traumas or not. I think we all have at some spectrum in life. And so, but I think everyone should commit to therapy. That's another non-negotiable on my calendar. And that's like probably the number one after feeding my kids.
Yeah.
No, I think therapy is incredibly important. Sometimes entrepreneurs will mistake that for a business coach. They'll feel the emotions and feel like, oh, this emotional coach, I'm sorry, business coach can help handle these, they'll give me solutions, but they're not getting to the root of the emotions. Without getting too touchy feely, I think therapy is a huge need for entrepreneurs.
I agree with that. Rachel, it was amazing, and I'm glad we talked about your 5 children from 10 to 20 now, and you're proud of all of them. That is obviously, and they are an extremely important part of your life. So it was a pleasure. Let's make sure we stay in touch, because I got some business questions I may bounce by you as well at some point. But this podcast will be released as it was presented in the next 4 to 5 hours. And then we'll stay in touch.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having you, Rachel. Take care.